All right, so today we're going to go over what I'm calling the case of the complex tachycardia. This was a presentation that I gave in conference, what we're doing called quick hits. So just a quick case and what I learned from it. So we have, let's start with the case. We have a 45-year-old male who's brought in by EMS for altered mental status, found in his front yard by his neighbor. These are his vitals, so you can tell he's a little hypotensive right here. It's tachycardic, tachypnic, close to being febrile, setting 94% on room air. So we have our front room and our back room. In our emergency department, our front room is our critical care area, and this is kind of one of the cognitive decision rules that we use. Do we think this patient needs to go to the front room or the back room? So front or back, that's the question with this patient. With those vital signs, I guess this is also an option. And then, of course, at my house, the toilet paper always ends up like this anyway. So this patient's going to go to the front room. So you get the patient to the front room, hook him up to the monitor, and the nurse says, "Doc?" And this is what you see on the rhythm strip. So what's next? Next we get an EKG, and this is what we see. And I had to fold it over for patient safety, but up on the top it said wide complex, ST elevation, consider MI, is literally what it said word for word up on the top here. So I get to the patient's room, I'm freaking out, and I'm like, we stick the pads on, I'm about ready to shock this patient, and right as I'm about to shock him, EMS says, "Hey, by the way, doc, I don't know if anyone told you, but he's a known diabetic," and says, his family that was there said that he hasn't been taking any of his medications recently. So we kind of slow down and kind of gather our breath at that time. We get some labs. We'll just say this is his ISTAT, even though this is his full BMP, but he was noted to have extremely high glucose. His sodium was extremely low as well, potassium 7.4. So we're going to talk a little bit about treatment of hyperkalemia, which ends up is what this guy had. So we have calcium first. So we have calcium, two different kinds, right? Calcium chloride versus calcium gluconate. The reason we use gluconate is it can go in through a peripheral IV. Calcium chloride is more caustic and must go through a central line. So we didn't have a central line on this person, so we chose to do calcium gluconate. And then next we have insulin. Let me get this out of the way. So we have insulin, right? So we did 10 units insulin and 2 amps of glucose to make sure that we didn't do the amps of glucose in this person because his glucose was already 1800 and didn't really need it. So we just gave him the 10 amps of 10 units, I should say, of insulin. Next, we do albuterol, and the dose usually is 15 to 20 milligrams, and you just run it continuous. And baking soda is sodium bicarb. The sodium bicarb has a role only if the patient is acidotic for hyperkalemia, which this patient was, but in reference to DKA treatment, we actually usually only treat it if their pH is below 6.9. So pH. And then we can talk about diuresis to kind of pee some of the hyper-K out. And one of those things that we can use is furosemide to help pee the potassium out. And this is KXL8, which is, it can be used to kind of secrete and excrete the potassium in the stool, which can cause diarrhea and can also cause bowel ischemia in this patient that was hypotensive. We ended up not giving KXL8 because he was already having some end organ damage, and we didn't want to cause any other end organ damage. And then we have dialysis, which is the definitive treatment, where you literally just dialyze the potassium off. So this was his repeat EKG after he got the insulin, he got the calcium, and he got the albuterol. And this is his repeat EKG, so you can see that the T waves have now normalized. The QRS wasn't actually wide in the first one, and he didn't have ischemia, although he was tachycardic. We also started fluids via the IV because he was extremely dehydrated. But you can see that his EKG change is all corrected. And then finally, what do EKGs and penises have in common? Potassium or hyperkalemia is known as the syphilis of EKGs, in that it can basically look like anything, right? So you can have that kind of weird peak T waves, and then progresses to the sinusoidal. You lose your P's, it kind of inverted, becomes sinusoidal. But it can also do that strange thing where it looks like widened complex tachycardia with these strange ST elevations as well. So something to always keep on your differential when you got wonky EKG findings. So in summary, hyper-K can look about like anything. Treatment for hyperkalemia includes insulin, albuterol, sodium bicarb, fluids, obviously, diuresis, K-exalate, and then dialysis is the definitive treatment. Know your tachyarrhythmia algorithms, although this person didn't actually need that because he ended up being in extreme DKA. And then make sure you get the rest of the history from your EMS, because that's kind of what saved me in this patient. So thanks for watching this video. Hope you learned something. See you around.